and my mother-in-law suffocated me and my baby out of pure evil, but she never imagined that God would make her pay for all her poison. The first night that Valeria slept under her mother-in-law's roof, she felt that someone was watching her, and when she opened her eyes, it was not a dream. Valeria was 24 years old and held Lucianito, her 5-month-old son, in her arms. Her slender hands and sun-kissed skin told stories of seasonal jobs, early mornings washing other people's clothes, and days without eating so her son could eat. She came from a dusty neighborhood where poverty wasn't a topic of conversation, but rather a thick air that was breathed every day. Andres, her husband, was 3 years older and worked as an assistant in a hardware store. They had been married for just over a year, and although life never gave them anything, they both dreamed of a better future. However, when the rent on the small room they lived in suddenly rose, Andres suggested they temporarily move in with his mother, Doña Graciela. Valeria accepted, although deep down something told her that this place wouldn't be a refuge, but a trap. Doña Graciela's house was on the outskirts of town, on a narrow street with twisted trees that seemed to whisper warnings to the wind, and it was an old building with ochre-colored walls and a rusty gate that creaked as if in protest every time it opened. From the door, a musty smell mixed with stale perfume hit her in the face, reminding her that spaces don't just hold dust, they also hold memories. Doña Graciela, about 65 years old, greeted them with a forced smile. Her hair, dyed an artificial blonde, was perfectly combed, but her eyes were like razors wrapped in velvet, and he looked Valeria up and down, lingering on the baby for a few seconds, and said, "So, this is my grandson." He leaned down slightly and touched the boy's hand. "They don't look like your face, Valeria. That's good." Valeria felt the invisible blow, but said nothing. Andres, uncomfortable, tried to soften the moment. "Mom, don't start, please, we're tired." "And of course, son, of course," Graciela responded, feigning sweetness. "Your room is at the back, overlooking the courtyard, but I want you to know that there are rules here, and they are followed." That first night, as they arranged the few belongings they had brought, Valeria noticed that the room was freezing, even though there were no open windows. The mattress was old, and every time she moved, it creaked as if complaining. And she left Lucianito asleep in his portable crib and lay down, but she couldn't stop thinking about the way Graciela had looked at her. The next morning, while Valeria was heating water on the stove to make the baby's milk, Graciela approached unannounced and opened the thermos. "What's this?" he asked, frowning. "Do you give him powdered milk?" "I don't like it. Children need real milk." "And that's all I can give him," Valeria replied, trying to remain calm. "It's good for his age. It's cheap," Graciela corrected, staring at him. "I don't like my grandson living on crumbs." Andres entered the kitchen just at that moment. "Mom, please." "Nandres, son, I only speak the truth," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I don't want my grandson to grow up weak." Valeria pressed her lips together, as she knew answering would only make things worse. The following days were a silent battle. Graciela imposed absurd rules. No hanging clothes in the yard after 5 o'clock. Don't leave the light on in the kitchen for more than 10 minutes. Don't open the refrigerator door more than 3 times a day. Every time Valeria tried to put her things away, her mother-in-law would move them without warning. And the worst was when Andres wasn't there. Graciela was friendly in front of him, but as soon as he left, she would drop poisonous comments. "I don't know what my son saw in you," she would say while chopping vegetables. "If he had wanted, he would have married a real woman." One night, around 2 a.m., Valeria woke up with a strange feeling. Something in the air seemed thick, as if she were lacking oxygen. She sat up slowly and saw a figure next to the crib. It was Graciela. The dim light from the lamp revealed her hand caressing Lucianito's face. "Andres will always be mine alone," the woman whispered, not noticing that Valeria was watching her. Valeria's heart began to beat rapidly. "What are you doing here?" she asked in a firm voice, even though she was trembling inside. Graciela turned slowly, as if she were in no hurry. "She was just looking at my grandson." "Is it forbidden?" "At this hour, yes," Valeria replied, hugging the baby. "He needs to sleep, and so do I." Graciela smiled, but it was a smile that had no warmth at all. You don't know what she needs, but I do." Valeria couldn't sleep the rest of the night. Sitting up in bed with the baby in her arms, she whispered softly, "Don't worry, my love. A mom will always protect you." Dawn arrived, but the tension didn't go away. Andres noticed that Valeria was pale and had dark circles under her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked as he buttoned his shirt to go to work. "Your mother," she replied without looking at him. "I don't like the way she treats me or the way she approaches the baby." Andres sighed as if this conversation were a minefield. And that's his character. Give him time. "Well, Andres, this isn't character, it's something else," Valeria said, but she kept the details to herself. And she didn't want him to think she was exaggerating, although deep down she knew what she'd seen that morning was just the beginning. The house, which had seemed large at first, now felt like a cage. Every hallway seemed narrower, every shadow longer. And the silence was never complete. There was always a creak, a whisper, a thud that made her head spin. And always, somehow, Graciella's gaze was there, watching, assessing, waiting. Valeria felt it even when the woman wasn't physically in the room, as if her presence had permeated the walls and the air they breathed. It was a constant, invisible weight that accompanied her every step. Andres didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he preferred not to see it, and the first hours of that morning passed in a strange silence, interrupted only by Lucianito's crying and the sound of Graciella banging the dishes too hard while washing them. Valeria prepared the baby's milk in the kitchen, but when she opened the can, she noticed the powder was lumpy and caked together. She frowned and smelled it. It didn't smell bad, but something about the texture seemed odd. She didn't say anything. She decided to give him a bottle, but while she was feeding him, she couldn't shake the thought that someone had tampered with the milk. Mid-morning, she went to look for diapers in the bag she kept by the crib. She didn't find any. She checked the closet, the shopping bags, even the baby stroller. Nothing. Her heart skipped a beat. She remembered perfectly well that there were at least 10 left. She went down to the dining room and, feigning calm, asked, "Graciella, have you seen Lucianito's diapers?" "No, dear," the woman replied without looking up from the tablecloth she was ironing. "If you were more organized, you wouldn't be losing things." Valeria clenched her fists. "Or I don't lose them. I always keep them in the same place." "Well, then maybe they evaporated," Graciella replied with a grimace that was meant to be innocent. The young woman decided not to argue further, and she knew any words would be used against her. When Andres returned that evening, she tried to talk about the subject. "The diapers have disappeared." "I don't know about you, Valeria," he interrupted tiredly. "Please, let's not start. My mother isn't going around hiding diapers." "And who else could it be?" as she insisted. Andres sighed and slumped back in his chair. "Maybe you put them somewhere else and don't remember. You're very stressed." Valeria felt like a bucket of ice water had been thrown over her. Not only did he not believe her, but he seemed to imply that she was losing her memory. That night, the heat in the room was unbearable. Valeria turned on the small fan they kept in the corner and pointed it at the crib. When she finally managed to sleep, a faint noise woke her. She opened her eyes and saw the silhouette of someone moving near the window, and the fan was off, the air heavy and dense. She got up abruptly and turned on the light, but saw no one. Andres was fast asleep. She turned the fan back on and stayed awake until dawn, observing every corner. The routine of the following days became a silent hell. Graciella criticized the way Valeria dressed the child, questioned his hygiene, and insinuated that she didn't feed him properly. At mealtimes, she would throw out poisonous phrases as if they were casual comments. "Andres, son, don't you notice the boy is thinner?" Before living here, his cheeks were fuller. Andres looked at his mother with a worried expression and then at Valeria, as if he didn't know who to believe. The young woman felt the ground beneath her feet becoming more unstable every day. One afternoon, when she went to prepare the milk, she found the lid on the jar of water she was using was uncovered. The taste when she tasted it was different, metallic. Her heart pounded. She filled another bottle directly from the tap and tasted the difference. And she had no proof, but she was convinced Graciella had done something. She threw away the water and made another milk without comment. Tensions exploded one night when Lucianito began crying nonstop. He was feverish. Valeria tried to bring it down with wet cloths, but he didn't improve. Andres was on extra duty and wasn't answering his phone. Desperate, she went down to the kitchen where Graciela was drinking tea. "I need you to come with me to the medical center," she said urgently. "The boy has a high fever." Graciela looked at her as if she were exaggerating. "It's just heat. Give him water and he'll feel better. I'm not going out at this hour. I'm not asking. I need help," Valeria replied, trembling. The woman slowly stood up, leaving the cup on the table. "Look, Valeria, if you don't know how to take care of your son, it's not my fault." The silence that followed was so thick that Valeria had to look away to keep from screaming. She grabbed the baby, wrapped him in a blanket, and left alone. When she returned, almost at dawn, with a diagnosis of a viral infection and prescribed an antibiotic, she found Andres awake, furious. "Why didn't you tell me? I called you and you didn't answer. Your mother didn't want to come with me." He looked at her incredulously. "Same here again. She's my mother." Valeria felt something inside her break. "And it's no coincidence, Andres. She's your mother, and she's doing things to hurt us. Are you listening to what you're saying?" he yelled. "She's my mother." The argument ended with Andres leaving the room and slamming the door. Valeria was left hugging Lucianito, feeling like the world was shrinking. The following weeks were an accumulation of small attacks. One day, clean bottles would disappear. Another, the baby's clothes would appear on the patio floor, damp and dusty. Valeria tried to document everything mentally, but she knew that without proof, Andres would never believe her. One morning, the heat became unbearable again. The fan was off again. This time, heart racing, he immediately got up and went out into the hallway. He heard slow footsteps moving away toward the kitchen. He followed the sound and found Graciela standing with her back to him, pouring herself a glass of water. "Why did you turn off the fan?" he asked in a trembling voice. The woman turned around, smiling. "I don't want my grandson to catch a cold. Direct air is bad." "What's bad is that I can't breathe," Valeria replied. Graciela took a step toward her. "Be careful how you talk to me, girl. You're in my house." Valeria stepped back, holding the baby. There was no doubt about it. Someone was trying to hurt her, and that someone was right in front of her. The silence between them became unbearable. Graciela watched her with such artificial calm that it was more terrifying than a scream. And the young woman felt that any word she said at that moment would be like pouring gasoline on an already burning fire. She decided to return to her room without responding. She closed the door and leaned against it, trying to control the trembling in her hands. Lucianito was breathing heavily, perhaps from the heat or perhaps because he sensed the tension. She rocked him slowly, whispering words she couldn't even hear clearly. Several minutes passed before she dared to turn off the light. Dawn arrived, laden with thick darkness. Valeria didn't know if she was dreaming or awake when she heard a strange sound, like the scraping of footsteps on the wooden floor. She opened her eyes and saw a shadow moving slowly toward the crib. At first, she thought it was Andres, but the light hair peeking out in the dim lamplight told her the truth. Graciela was leaning over the crib, holding a pillow. The pressure exerted on Lucianito's small body was evident. Valeria felt an icy chill pass through her chest. She didn't think, she just reacted, leaping out of bed and pushing the woman with all the strength her weak arms allowed. The pillow fell to the floor. The baby began to cry with a stifled sound, as if he had been gasping for air. "She's crazy!" Valeria cried, hugging her son. "What's she doing?" Graciela took a step back with a crooked smile. "Calm down, kid. I just wanted her to stop crying. She was going to kill him." Valeria's voice trembled as much as her body. "And no one's going to believe you, kid," the woman replied with disturbing calm. Valeria locked the door and dialed the police number, her heart pounding. She explained to everyone what had happened and asked for a patrol car. Not even 15 minutes passed before the doorbell rang insistently. Andres, who had arrived minutes before the patrol car arrived, went to answer it. When the officers entered, Valeria came out of the room with the baby in her arms, pointing at Graciela. "She tried to suffocate my son." Graciela, without wasting a second, put a hand to her chest and pretended to faint. She fell onto the couch with a groan. Andres ran to her. "Mom, he hit me," he whispered in a broken voice. "He pushed me against the wall." The officers exchanged glances. One of them asked Valeria if she had any witnesses or evidence. She shook her head, trembling. "Ma'am, the accusations are serious, but without proof and with the opposite story," the police officer said in a tone more bureaucratic than empathetic. "It's best if you try to remain calm and avoid conflict." Valeria felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet. Andres, still kneeling beside his mother, looked at her reproachfully. "I can't believe you'd make something like that up." "It's not a fabrication," Valeria cried, tears in her eyes. She was resting her pillow on him. The officers left, leaving behind a silence heavier than before. Graciela sat up slowly, looking at her with that poisonous smile that seemed etched on her face. "I told you, no one will believe you." Valeria re-entered the room, locking it. The baby was sleeping exhausted in her arms, as if his tiny body had spent all its strength in that brief, desperate cry. And the young woman sank to the floor, leaning her back against the bed. Her tears fell uncontrollably as she murmured a prayer. "My God, give me strength. I don't know how much longer I can go on." For the next few hours, Valeria lay awake, listening to every noise in the house, every creak of wood, every footstep that echoed in the hallway. She knew it wasn't over, that what had happened that night was just a glimpse of how far Graciela could go. And the most terrifying thing was that she had nowhere to go, no one to protect her, and no evidence to prove what was happening. That certainty fell upon her like a slab, crushing any attempt at calm. And for 2 whole days, Valeria barely spoke, limiting herself to caring for Lucianito and avoiding Graciela more than necessary. Andres was distant, immersed in his work routine, with a gaze that seemed to escape hers. It was as if she didn't want to hear another word about what had happened, as if closing her eyes could erase the attention that permeated every corner of the house. The 3rd morning after the police visit, while Valeria was washing clothes in the yard, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered. A low, quick woman's voice spoke only 5 words. "You're not the first. Be careful." Before Valeria could ask who was speaking, the call was cut off. She felt a chill run down her spine, and she looked around the yard as if expecting to find someone watching her, but there was nothing but the old wall with damp patches and the neglected flower pots that Graciela never watered. She kept the information to herself. She couldn't risk discussing it with Andres, not after the last time he reacted with disbelief. That night, while they were having dinner, Graciela seemed especially satisfied. She ate slowly, watching Valeria's every movement as if gauging her reactions. "Is something wrong, Valeria?" he asked with a false sweetness that made her blood run cold. "You're quieter than usual. I'm just tired," she replied, looking away. Graciela smiled, but her eyes seemed to be enjoying a secret game. Andres said nothing. He finished his plate and stood up, muttering that he had to get up early the next day. When the house fell silent, Valeria made a decision. If the woman who called was telling the truth, she had to find out what had happened earlier in that house. And she waited for Graciela to lock herself in her room, and then began, with light steps, checking the areas where she thought her mother-in-law might keep private things. She started with the dining room cupboard, then the hall closets. Everything was too tidy, almost like a display case for show. Around midnight, he opened the door to a pantry off the kitchen. There, among old boxes and glass bottles, he saw something that didn't fit, a small wooden trunk with a rusty lock. He bent down and pulled it open. It was heavier than he imagined, and he dragged it to a brighter corner and, after several attempts, managed to pick the lock with a kitchen knife. Inside, he found a collection of objects that seemed to belong to another life. There were old photos, some in black and white, others with faded colors. Several featured a younger Graciela posing next to people Valeria didn't recognize. Among the photos were newspaper clippings, all with headlines about unsolved disappearances or deaths. But what struck her most was a small, neatly folded cloth diaper with the initials IG hand-stitched on it. They weren't Lucianito's initials. Her heart pounded as she stared at the embroidery. He put the diaper in his pocket along with 2 clippings and a photo of Graciela holding a baby who wasn't Lucianito. And he closed the trunk as best he could and left it in its place, making sure everything looked intact. That night, he could barely sleep. The images of the clippings mingled in his mind with the mysterious call. Who was Ig? What had happened to the baby in the photos? Then the next day, she took advantage of the fact that Andres was at work, and Graciela was out to visit an elderly neighbor who always seemed to be watching everything from the window. Doña Teresa, with white hair and a hard gaze, greeted her with some distrust. I came to ask you something," Valeria said bluntly. "Do you know of anyone who lived in this house before me?" The old woman looked at her silently for several seconds, as if considering whether to speak. Then she sighed. "That woman has hands stained with other people's tears." Valeria felt goosebumps rise on her skin. "What does she mean?" "There was a girl many years ago, young like you, with a baby. She lived here for a while and one day she disappeared. No one ever saw her again. The police came, but they found nothing. I can't say more because the walls have ears." And the young woman was grateful for the information and returned home with an upset stomach. She kept the diaper and the scraps in a safe place inside a sealed bag that she hid in her portable crib under the baby's mattress. When Andres arrived that night, she tried to test the waters. "Do you remember someone named Isabel?" He raised his head in surprise. "Where did you get that name? I just want to know if you knew her." Andres put his fork down, visibly annoyed. "Enough with your fantasies, Valeria. I'm sick of you looking for ghosts where there aren't any." She didn't respond, and she knew that insisting would only provoke another argument. But inside her mind, certainty grew. She was going to find the truth, even if it meant unearthing the darkest secrets of the woman who shared a roof with her. That night, when she closed her eyes, she heard the voice of the anonymous call again. "You're not the first. Be careful." Now he understood that those words could be the key to saving his life and that of his son. What he didn't know was that from that moment on, Graciela would begin to suspect that something had changed, and that the war he had started would become even more dangerous. His gaze, once sharp, became more inquisitive. She began to follow Valeria's every movement with her eyes, as if hoping to find evidence of something she couldn't yet name. Valeria, for her part, learned to hide her gestures better, to speak only the right amount, and to maintain a neutral expression, even though inside the tension burned inside her. The change soon showed its consequences. Graciela began to complain of ailments she hadn't experienced before. First, she experienced brief dizziness, then a loss of appetite, and in a matter of weeks, she lost several pounds. Her once steady hands now trembled slightly when she held a cup. Sometimes her voice would trail off in the middle of a sentence, forcing her to cough to catch it. Valeria noticed these symptoms but remained distant. He didn't want the woman to think he felt sorry for her physical deterioration, although deep down, a part of her felt a strange conflict. Andres was distracted. His attention was suddenly focused on a problem of his own. He'd been fired from the hardware store. The owner, citing low sales and staff cuts, handed him his severance pay with a handshake that didn't hide his indifference. When he got home that night, the news hit him like a bucket of cold water. Valeria saw him come in, head down, without even taking off his jacket. "What happened?" she asked, leaving her spoon on the table. "They kicked me out," he said in a hollow voice. The silence stretched. Graciela, sitting in the armchair, smiled almost imperceptibly, as if her son's misfortune was another piece in a game only she understood. The economic crisis hit quickly. The little severance pay Andres received went to paying overdue debts and buying food for 2 weeks. From then on, money became scarce. Valeria began doing sewing work for neighbors and selling desserts on request. She didn't earn much, but it was enough to keep Lucianito fed and cover the basics. It was during this situation that Graciela's health deteriorated noticeably. Mornings found her pale, with dry lips and sunken eyes. Some days she didn't get out of bed, and her complaints became more frequent. Andres, despite everything she had been through, seemed concerned. "She's sick, Valeria," he said one night while helping her fold clothes. "We can't leave her like this." Valeria held back the answer she wanted to give. She looked him in the eye and nodded. "I'll do what I can." From then on, he began to look after her, bringing her soup, checking that she drank water, and keeping the room clean. Their relationship was cordial but cold. There were no kind words between them, only a necessary exchange of short phrases. The nights, however, continued to be unsettling. Although Graciella's fragility seemed real, Valeria couldn't forget the pillow on the crib, the fan off, and the missing diapers, as she slept with the door closed and the key in the lock. One morning, a noise woke her. It came from Graciella's room. It was a persistent cough, followed by incoherent murmurs. Valeria got up and entered to find her burning with fever. The woman spoke between gasps as if trapped in a dream. Isabel whispered, clutching the sheets. "Forgive me." Valeria remained motionless. The name resonated in her mind like an echo connecting all the pieces she had found. She leaned toward her. "Who is Isabel?" Graciella opened her eyes just enough for Valeria to see the wet gleam in them. "If you knew what I did, you wouldn't touch me with a stick." The young woman swallowed. Her heart was pounding in her chest. "I don't want revenge, just peace for my son." Graciella watched her for another second before closing her eyes and letting exhaustion overcome her. Valeria tucked her in and remained silent for a few minutes, trying to understand whether what she had just heard was a feverish delirium or a confession. In the days that followed, the words from that night haunted her mind. The name Isabel was tied to something dark, something Graciella had been carrying, and that perhaps explained her cruelty, but she also understood that knowing the truth could be more painful than living with doubt. The tension in the house remained. Graciella's illness made her vulnerable but no less dangerous. Andres, out of work and facing financial pressure, was becoming increasingly irritable. Any comment could provoke an argument. Valeria, silently, began to notice that her mother-in-law's fragility awakened an instinct she hadn't expected to feel: compassion. It wasn't affection, but rather a strange form of humanity that prevented her from wishing her an immediate end, no matter how much the past screamed out reasons to hate her. What Valeria didn't know was that Graciella's deterioration was about to open a rift that would reveal a secret capable of changing everything, and that the name Isabel would be the key that would push her across a line of no return. And the atmosphere in the house became dense, as if the air were charged with a storm that no one could see, but everyone felt. Andres seemed more exhausted than ever, unsuccessfully searching for work, and Graciella was spending more and more time in bed, although her gaze remained a sharp edge that could cut through any attempt at calm. One night, the heat in Graciella's room was stifling. Valeria came in with a glass of water and found her half-recumbent, muttering nonsense. Her skin was damp with sweat and her hands were trembling. Fever flushed her cheeks and dulled her eyes. Valeria approached, placing the glass on the table, and then she heard it clearly. Isabel whispered to Graciella in a broken voice. It shouldn't have happened." Valeria leaned toward her. Who was Isabel? Graciella's eyes opened slightly, and in them there was something more than delirium, an old, corrosive weight. "She was just like you. And she came to this house looking for a roof, carrying a baby. She said it was Andres's." Valeria felt a knot in her stomach. "And what happened?" Graciella's breathing became more labored. "She couldn't allow it. I would have ruined his life, so I made sure they never came back." A shiver ran down Valeria's skin. "What did you do to him?" The woman closed her eyes and pressed her lips together. "And don't ask. I did it for him. Always for him." Valeria took a step back, trying to process what she had just heard. That confession wasn't just rambling. It sounded too precise. Suddenly, she realized that the diaper with the initials IG and the photo in the trunk had a much more sinister meaning. Over the next few days, she avoided being alone with Graciella for too long, but she watched her closely, searching for more clues. Andres, oblivious to everything, talked about failed interviews and accumulated debts. Every time Valeria tried to mention Isabel's name, he closed in on a wall of silence. One afternoon, while she was folding clothes in her bedroom, she heard knocking on the front door. When she opened it, she found herself standing there, a man she didn't recognize. He was around 35 years old, with a tired face and a look that seemed to be searching for something long lost. "I'm looking for Valeria," he said. "It's me," she replied cautiously. "I need to talk to you. It's about your son." Valeria's heart raced. She invited him into the hallway, making sure Gracielle couldn't hear. The man took a deep breath before speaking. "My name is Esteban. I had a brief relationship with you a year ago. I didn't know you were pregnant. Valeria felt the ground shift beneath her feet. No, it can't be. Lucianito is my son, he said with a certainty that left no room for doubt. I've been looking for you. The words pierced her like a knife, as she remembered a time when Andres and she had had a brief breakup, a week apart, when in her solitude she had made a mistake that she never imagined would come back to haunt her like this. She couldn't say anything. The silence became unbearable until Andres appeared in the hallway, frowning. Who is this? Esteban looked him straight in the eyes. I'm the child's father. The emotional shock was immediate. Andres, his face distraught, turned to Valeria. It was all a lie, Valeria. She felt tears burning her eyes. I didn't know either until now. The tension exploded into shouts. Andres accused, Valeria tried to explain, and Esteban asked them to think about Lucianito's well-being. Graciela appeared in the hallway, leaning against the doorframe with a crooked smile that seemed to enjoy the chaos. I knew it, she said quietly, just enough for Valeria to hear. I always knew he wasn't my blood. That night, the entire house became an emotional battlefield. Andres locked himself away without speaking to anyone. Esteban left with the promise of returning, and Valeria, alone in her room, realized that Graciela's secrets and her own had become entangled in a vortex that no one could stop. What no one imagined was that this double confession, Isabel's disappearance and Lucianito's true paternity, would not only destroy what little remained of the family's unity, but would also ignite a spark of revenge in Graciela's ailing heart, a spark that still had the strength to burn. That night there was no rest for anyone. Andres didn't leave his room, Esteban didn't return, and Valeria remained by the crib, her eyes glued to her son, feeling that any movement in that house could mean danger. And the next morning silence reigned, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. Rather, it seemed to measure every breath. Graciela lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Valeria came in to bring her breakfast, and as she placed the tray on the table, she noticed the woman looking at her differently, as if she no longer had the strength to hide or contain her hatred. You look so much like her, Graciela murmured, almost to herself. Valeria stopped, not knowing whether to ask. The mother-in-law continued speaking in her low, tired voice. Ah, Isabel. She had that look, the one that challenged me even when she remained silent. I thought that by erasing her from Andres's life I was protecting him, but all I did was allow my own demons to grow. Valeria sensed that those words were an attempt at confession, although not entirely sincere. What happened to her? She asked, without softening her tone. Graciela looked at her for a long moment. If I told you, you wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. The fever and weakness were wearing Graciela down every day. Andres, although he still resented Valeria, began to worry more about his mother, perhaps because seeing her so fragile reminded him that she wouldn't always be there. And the tension between him and Valeria was no longer just shouting, but prolonged silences and unfulfilling glances. 2 weeks passed, and Graciela's health deteriorated dramatically. She couldn't get up on her own. Her voice had dropped to a whisper, and her hands could barely hold a spoon. One night, while Valeria was changing her sheets, the woman grabbed her arm with unexpected strength. When I leave, she said with effort, there's a letter in the drawer of my nightstand. It's for you. Valeria didn't reply. She finished arranging her bed and left. It wasn't until 3 days later, when Graciela's breathing became irregular and Andres went out to get some medicine, that Valeria opened the drawer. Among tissues and a nearly empty bottle of perfume, she found a yellow envelope with her name on it. She opened it with trembling hands, and the letter was a mixture of confession and legacy. Graciela recounted that Isabel had arrived pregnant, claiming that Andres was the father. She said the humiliation she felt led her to plan her disappearance. And she didn't give details of the act itself, but she did mention that she got rid of everything that reminded her of her. Then, in a twist Valeria hadn't expected, she confessed that she kept a small fortune in a savings account, money from the sale of a property she never declared, and that she had decided to leave everything in Lucianito's name, acknowledging that even though he wasn't her biological grandson, she had learned to see him as a child who was not guilty of anything. Valeria put the letter away without saying a word. That night, as she gave Graciela water, the woman stared at her. "If you knew what I did, you wouldn't touch me with a stick," she repeated in a faint voice. Valeria took a deep breath. "I'm not here because of what you did, and I'm here because I don't want my son to grow up learning to hate." Over the next few days, Valeria cared for Graciela with a serenity she didn't even know she possessed. She fed her, made her bed, and spoke to her sparingly, but in a neutral tone, without reproach. Andres seemed confused to see her like this, but didn't ask. On the last night, the fever returned with a vengeance. Valeria remained by the bed, moistening her lips with a cloth. Near dawn, Graciela opened her eyes and looked at her for a long time. "Now I understand," she whispered. "The punishment was seeing me in you." And with that phrase, she stopped breathing. Valeria remained motionless, feeling the weight of all the untold stories spill over the room. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stroked her cold forehead and got up to cover her with the sheet. Andres came in minutes later and collapsed next to the bed. In the days that followed, the letter and the inheritance remained a secret between Valeria and her conscience. She didn't show it to Andres. The money became a fund to ensure Lucianito had the opportunities she never had. Esteban returned a month later, not to demand anything, but to offer his support in whatever the boy needed. Valeria agreed to maintain contact, but made it clear that Lucianito would learn the truth when he was ready, not before. And one afternoon, while playing with her son in the yard, Valeria looked at him and said softly, "Son, may resentment never take away your light." And God seemed to answer her mind in the warm silence of that hour. Evil can live for years, but time always takes its toll. What did you think of this story? Many people are experiencing similar situations. We hope Valeria's voice lives on in your heart too. If this story moved you, please share it. Be part of the change. Tell us in the comments what you would have done in a situation like this from where you're watching. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Every gesture you make inspires us to continue creating profound and real stories every day. And don't leave yet, our next shocking story is about to appear on your screen. You can click on the links you see right now. They're part of an exclusive selection of captivating stories. We thought of them especially for you. Thanks for joining us. See you in the next video.